Hello, I'm Mark Licht, an associate professor and extension cropping systems specialist with Iowa State University Extension. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about estimating cereal rye biomass accumulation. And in particular, I want to get into talking about using a visual obstruction method that can help us do that maybe a little bit more efficiently. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about what that actually is and why cereal rye biomass accumulation is important. So just to kind of start off, if you've listened to any of my other cover crop talks, I usually start off with what's your goal? And I think it fits with this one as well, because when we think about biomass accumulation from cover crops in the past, we've kind of always thought about the nutrient sediment loss reduction, the soil health aspects of it. But there's other benefits that come from having biomass. And quite honestly, we probably need more biomass if we're thinking about forage utilization to cut back on feeding hay or resting pastures, things like that. Or if we're thinking about weed suppression, we may need more biomass as well. So there's some really important reasons why we need to be talking about what's your goal in conjunction with how much biomass you're looking for, how much biomass you need. And so one of the things that I would point out with this is that, quite honestly, with any of these, the more biomass that we produce, the better or the more benefits that we're going to get from it. And so I would also, maybe state that, with some of these things, the law of diminishing returns does come into play, right? So at some point in time, you're going to have to balance the amount of biomass that you're producing with the benefits that you're getting, with how that's going to affect other parts of the farming operation, the crop system. And so kind of thinking through that, something like nutrients and sediment loss reduction, or even soil health, where you're not getting a direct return on those investments of that cover crop establishment, right? And you don't want to have a negative impact on the corn crop or even the soybean crop in dry years. Then we have to start thinking about, okay, so where is that tipping point? Where's the amount of biomass that we need to get those benefits without having the negative impacts? Things like forages or even weed suppression, that tipping point is going to be at a higher biomass level, likely. And so recognizing that and starting to see where those tipping points are, where those critical levels are, is really going to help us. Okay, so getting into kind of the nuts and bolts about how do we determine biomass. And so on I'll call it the technical level, what we do in our research programs, and this is an example that actually comes from the NRCS, and basically talking about some basic supplies, right? So getting some clippers and bags so you can cut the residue, put it in a bag, a scale to weigh it, a camera just to take a picture just for a reference of, for the sample you took, what does it look like? Kind of a future landmark, so to speak, with it. And then a farm photo, again, just to kind of mark down where were you at when you took these biomass samples, whether it's just to kind of keep it as a reference point or whether you're thinking about wanting to sample those areas again in a different year where you had different weather conditions, something like that. And so the NRCS has also suggested either a hoop method or a row method. And again, we use these in research as well. The hoop method, what we're really looking at there is probably for the aerial seeding or the broadcast seeding, something that, we don't have good row structure that's going to work really well in, although it can work in a drilled row environment. And then that row method, looking at the length of row, works really well in drilled conditions. Obviously, it's not going to work in a broadcast or an overseeded. The key here that I make this note of it being from the NRCS is because they're recommending using an area or sampling an area of 1.92 square feet. And so that's what the length of row is, or the hoop circumference is, to get you that 1.92 feet. Well, they do that because then it's an easy factor to go from pounds of biomass collected to pounds per acre. And I'll show you that here in a slide coming up. I would note that you could really sample a square feet just to get more samples of that 1 square foot. You could also do something a little bit more aggressive. I have a colleague that would say, even farmers should be sampling 4, 5, or 6 square feet at a time to help understand and minimize any variance or biases that are occurring. So once we got kind of the equipment and we're ready to go, the first step really is to kind of choose a representative field area or an area of interest. And so the idea is here that you want to know what you're sampling. And so if you have a field that has a lot of variance in it because it was aerial seeded, and so you have areas that are thicker versus thinner, you may choose multiple areas there to get a good representative idea of how much biomass you have. You may have some things like landscape position or areas of a field that are wetter or drier. So there may be reasons to subsample areas of interest versus looking for something that's representative of the whole field. And that's, again, why it's really important to kind of mark down on a piece of paper or a map, this is where you took those samples at. Step 2, again, just take those pictures. It's a good reference point for when you start looking back of, okay, so I had 1,000 pounds of biomass per acre. What does that look like? So taking those pictures can help us do that. And then finally, the key here is, on step 3 is really clipping it at ground level. That's going to give you your truest estimate of that above ground biomass. And so clipping it at ground level, and then in step 4, putting it into a paper bag. And so I recommend a paper bag. Other people say putting it in a plastic bag is fine, especially if you're just looking for a wet weight. I like the paper bag because it allows you to get a wet weight, and then if you want to let it air dry or even take a subsample and stick it in an oven, you can get a dry weight from it. And so that paper bag allows you a little bit more time to deal with it, because if you leave it in a plastic bag too long, it's going to start spoiling on you. So collect that biomass, put it in a paper bag preferably, but if you're just looking for a wet weight, a plastic bag will be fine. Step 5, weighing the sample, right? So that's why we need the scale. Down to a gram accuracy is what we do recommend, just because that helps us be a little bit more accurate, and those are still pretty readily accessible. So weighing the sample. And then in step 6, this is where we go from the weight per 1.92 square feet by multiplying out by 50. And so by taking that weight from the 1.92 square feet, then you're going to get a wet weight per acre. Or if you were to dry that sample down, then you would get a dry weight per acre. So again, you can use different area sizes. It's just that your conversion factor to get it into pounds or grams per acre are going to be quite a bit different. Okay, and then if you haven't done the dry weight, if you've just taken it from a wet weight, then step 7 is converting it into a dry weight, because most of the research presented is a dry weight basis. And so that conversion factor, what we're really looking at there, and I haven't shown it on a slide because there are some differences that come out depending on if you have a winter wheat versus a rye versus an oat or something like that. But in general, we would say that a cool season grass is going to be around, at least prior to the head stage, is going to be roughly 25 to 35% dry weight. Once it's headed out and you have the boot stage through the flowering stage, you're going to be at about 45% dry weight. And then as you get mature seed, you get the leaf tips drying out. That's about 60% dry weight. And then once you have basically you've got not only the mature seed, but the whole plant is drying out. Now you're looking at somewhere around 85 to 90% dry weight. And so making those corrections, there's different resources that can help you. The ones that I just talked about were available through the Iowa NRCS in one of their publications. So there are different conversion factors that you can look for if that's what you really want to do, is go from a wet weight and just estimate what that dry weight is. Okay, so the other part of this, and maybe I should have put this first, but a lot of times what we're doing is we're just simply using rough estimates. And so the same publication I mentioned from the NRCS has a rough estimate for cereal rye at 6 to 8 inches being about 800 pounds. 12 to 15 is going to be maybe upwards of 2,000 pounds. And then once you get to 24 inches, you're closer to 4,000 pounds. So you can use, estimates like that. I'll show you here the risk of doing that. And before I get to the cereal rye part of it, this is out of North Dakota State University, where they were estimating when you have 100% broadleaf ground cover, so that'd be your brassicas or your legumes, 6 inches of height is about that 2,000 pounds, and then 150 pounds for each additional inch. So I wanted to show North Dakota State's because, one, they have broadleaves, but they also have a different estimate of kind of what that small grain ground cover is going to look like. And so 100% ground cover, 8 inches of height, their data set would show that that's roughly 2,000 pounds of biomass. And so there you can kind of see, a pretty big difference, quite honestly, between what the Iowa NRCS had at 800 pounds to what NDSU was having at 2,000 pounds. Why are there differences? It could be differences in percent ground cover. It could be different seeding rates. It could be different varieties of those various species that were used there. So I know North Dakota State had multiple species, whereas the NRCS was using just cereal rye. But was it an Albon? Was it a variety not stated? Was it a Wheeler or something like that? So there's going to be differences that do show up there that we have to recognize, that just using these rules of thumb may not necessarily be as accurate as we need them or want them to be. So getting into a little bit more deeply on what we were working with here this past spring. So we were using a Robel pole for visual obstruction. And so this is a method that comes out and is used quite a bit in rangeland ecology, some natural resources ecology, things like that. This actual graphic here, I've given the source for it there, but it's a fire service that's using it as a way of estimating. And so that's where this graphic really comes from. But so really what we're doing is we have a pole out there that has, ours have black and white stripes. This is showing it with white and red stripes on it. And each of those stripes is a known height off the ground. Okay, and so that's where the 1, 2, 3, 4 comes from, because they're using decimeters. So the line between the 1 and the 2 is 1 decimeter, and so on and so forth. So the key with this type of a measurement or assessment, you're using a known pole with different heights on it, but you're also putting the viewpoint at 4 meters off and a meter high off the ground, and so that's where you'd make that observer location be. And so we didn't necessarily do this with a live person. We did take and automate that, and we used a trail camera. And so what that allowed us to do is we were able to take images twice a day. So we had a early mid-morning, and then a later afternoon time that we did this. And what that allowed us to do is we were able to get daily time steps. And so we knew essentially the exact day that we went from 1 decimeter to 2 decimeters and so on. And so it's a quick and easy method. And once, from a research standpoint, once we kind of get a nice regression developed, then all of a sudden we're able to design these kits where, farmers can take them out and do it, spontaneously whenever they're at those fields checking what the biomass height might be. So kind of give you a viewpoint of what this really looks like. And I'm going to start on the right-hand side. So the VOR is the visual obstruction rating. That's along the top. And so a VOR of 0 on that right-hand pole just means that, we have vegetation, but it's not obstructing more than 50% of that first decimeter. The second one over is a VOR equals 1, and what that's telling us is that we have a visual obstruction of that first decimeter, and we haven't obstructed the second decimeter yet. And so you can kind of see what that looks like as you go from a rating of 2, 5, and 7. And what we're really looking at is, just how much of that biomass is obstructing, kind of what height on that pole. And so in this example, they're using a 50% visual obstruction rating. In our research, we used a 100%, and we're going backwards and doing the 75 and 50% obstruction now. So the data that I'll show you in the coming slides are based off of a 100% obstruction. And so here's the first one, and we've converted the decimeters into crop height in inches, and I really should probably use a different term there because that's our visual obstruction height rather than a crop height. And so as you can see, once we get out there, there's a little bit more variation right there in the first readings and time frames. And so basically a range of basically 100 up to 2,300 in our biomass. But then as we move past or closer to that, I'll call it the 4-inch crop height, then we get a lot better correlation with it. So at roughly 5 inches, we're coming up with about 2,000 pounds per acre. By the time we get to 10 inches, we're about 3,000 pounds per acre. And by the time we get out to 15, we're roughly that 35 to 4,000 pounds of biomass. We did this over different landscape positions, so a summit, a back slope, and a toe slope. Those really didn't show anything different, quite honestly. And statistically, there was no difference in those biomass counts and the crop height. And so this method here is giving us about a 75% confidence that we're understanding the variance anyhow with that regression that we have. And so, our hope is after doing it this first year, we're going to do it at basically the same trial next year. And then we're going to add on 3 or 4 additional trials just to be able to get a larger data set to see what this looks like across years and across different establishment practices. Again, looking at that same data set, just kind of estimating and wondering, okay, so how well does, the growing degree days, how well do those estimate crop height? And so I should maybe define growing degree days a little bit here because it's a little bit different than maybe what I would normally talk about from a corn or soybean growth perspective. So with cereal rye, we actually are using a 32 degree Fahrenheit as our base, and we don't have a maximum on it. So this is looking at basically any of those days, and we're accumulating heat units when those days are above 32 degrees. Also, another thing to keep in mind here, this is starting at January 1st rather than either April or May or whatever the actual planting dates were. And so this regression here is capturing about 80% of the variation in understanding things, right? And so you can see that it's fairly good, especially when we're below 600 degrees accumulated. Once we got out there above 800, now our variance is getting a little bit higher. And so a few different things potentially occurring there associated with soil moisture, the face of that landscape as that slope goes, right? So the sunnier slopes are going to have a little bit more growth than the shaded slopes. And then kind of getting back to, again, how do we estimate this a little bit more accurately even than just throwing, a pole out there and measuring our height? Can we just take, those heat units and how does that correlate with the biomass accumulation? And here we have almost a 90% correlation coefficient. And so quite a bit better than maybe I had anticipated. But it is capturing that variation quite well. And so again, this is just kind of a preliminary look at, a couple different quick and easy ways of estimating how much biomass is produced in a way of, using that information to help us terminate at the proper time for what our goals are. I do want to take a second here and just show some data from Dr. Brennan. He's a USDA researcher out in California. And so he was doing a little bit of work in this area as well. And so a couple things, from his research that I wanted to point out. The first one being this figure here where he's looking at the crop density in plants per square meter. So don't necessarily get caught up in the units there. The bigger point is kind of looking at the 1x versus the 3x. And what we're talking about is the 1x seeding rate of cereal rye versus the 3x seeding rate of cereal rye. And that I believe the 1X was about 60 pounds per acre. So one of the things across those years, you notice that the black dots and the hollow or open circles are very closely aligned most of the time. There's a couple years where they do vary a little bit, but they're really quite similar based on the crop density of those seeding rates. So one of the things that kind of helps explain this is that in an environment where you have the ability for a fair amount of growth, the more heat you have allows those to tiller more. And so obviously out in California, they're able to get more tillering out of the 1X rate versus what they had at the 3X rate, because the higher seeding rate slowed down or decreased the amount of tillering that actually occurred. In this figure here, really kind of the same type of mentality that I was working with. So that horizontal axis is the growing degree days, whereas the vertical axis is our above ground dry matter. It's the units on this one are megagrams per hectare, but that's almost a 1-to-1 equivalent, not quite, but almost a 1-to-1 equivalent with tons per acre. And so looking up at that top figure of that, you see the cereal rye, and you see a very good correlation between heat unit accumulation and the amount of biomass. Whereas that middle figure, that's a legume, so that's got a vetch, it's got a clover, and I believe it's got a field pea or something along those lines, mixed with a cereal rye. And there, what you notice is that there's a lot more scatter on it. It's not quite as well correlated. And the bigger differences there are when we look at the lower heat unit accumulations. And then just for the purpose of just describing what we're seeing there on the mustard, because we're not using a lot of mustards as cover crops, but what they've seen is, again, just like cereal rye, heat unit accumulation is a very good estimate of that mustard biomass growth. So another thing that I wanted to show is more recently he's been looking at different methods of estimating how much biomass you have, rather than collecting heat unit accumulations or going out and physically measuring, the height or visual obstruction. And so one of the things that he has been working on here the last couple of years is what he calls the main stem length. And so most small grains, as you're well aware, have tillers that come off that main stem. And we don't really, in this method, don't necessarily care about those tillers, but rather the main stem. And then basically it's measuring the length of that main stem from the crown up until the highest part of that main stem. And so in this case, it's the seed head that's developing that you would stop at. But if you had rye or wheat that had awns on it, barley there, you may be measuring out past the seed head to the tip of the awns. And then in the lower right image, at times you do run into, especially once you've got some jointing, bends in that main stem for a variety of reasons, right? And so the key here is you're measuring the total stem length and not just the canopy height. And so as you measure that, you have to bend the tape measure, so to speak, to get to that total stem length versus a canopy length. And then the data behind this, I know this is a slightly bigger graph or busy graph. It has both the English and the metric units on it. So the English units for the main stem length are on the top part of the graph in inches, and then the pounds per acre for above ground biomass are on the right-hand side of it. So the data that he was collecting was all using Merced rye. And then he used a couple different research trials that he had. So he had some conventional and some organic trials there that were associated with the USDA. And then they had some on-farm and some private places where they were collecting this data as well. And so they've got I'll say a fairly robust data set just from the differences that you're going to see in establishment and the type of management going into it. And so this method did a little bit better than either of ours, quite honestly, did with using the growing degree days. And so it was explaining about 87% of that variation, right? And you can see there that it does a very good job, a very low variance, below 4,500 pounds of biomass. Above 4,500 pounds, then you start to see that variance increase a little bit. And again, that part of that's associated with what kind of management's gone into, um, the rye establishment there. Okay, so as we kind of think about why is biomass important, I also like to remind people or think about, if we really know the importance of biomass, then we have to come back and say, how do we establish that cover crop to get the biomass that we want? And I do think of it as it kind of the 4 R's mentality. Yeah, I'll steal it from, the nutrient management realm, but we need to have the right species out there. We need to be thinking about seeding rates, what time we're going to be doing that seeding, and then what method we're going to be using. So there's a variety of things there that we do need to look at, because these things can influence how much biomass we get. Sometimes it may just influence the fall biomass. Other times it may influence that spring biomass as well. So as far as the right species, if we're thinking purely about biomass, the no-brainer is to use small grains. So the winter wheat, the winter rye, the triticale, even oats, they can give us more biomass than what we would maybe be able to get from brassicas or legumes. Sometimes if we have a early enough seeding, those brassicas can be really productive. But if we're limiting production time, that time that they're growing in the fall, we're going to have lower biomass with the brassicas and the legumes. As far as the right seeding rates, again, this comes back to the goals. We know that if you're trying to get a lot of biomass for weed suppression, you probably need to increase your seeding rates. And so for a winter rye, for a winter wheat, you may need to be looking at maybe even upwards of 100 pounds per acre. If you're just trying to balance the soil health, the nutrient reduction, that now you might be able to look at a seeding rates of the cereal grains, maybe in the maybe in that 40 to 60 pound area, right? For forage, you're probably going to want to be somewhere in between those two. So you might be 60 to 90 pounds, somewhere in there. The seeding method and seeding time are going to influence this as well, right? So if we're aerial seeding or if we're broadcast seeding, because of uniformity of that seed placement, we're probably increasing our seeding rate a little bit. If we're drill seeding, and that's going to be a little bit later on us, but if we're drill seeding, we can probably drop our seeding rates down because we're going to have very uniform placement of it. From a seeding time perspective, I often, start to think about how much time is it for their, these crops to grow. With the cereal grains, if you're seeding really early, say September, even early October, and you can get good emergence and growth on it, then you can get away with a lower seeding rate because they're going to tiller out for you. But if you're seeding later, if you seed, late October into November, you're not going to have much time for growth that's going to lead us into getting those tillers. And so you're going to want to increase your seeding rates. From the right time perspective, again, species are really dependent here. With any of these, to get more biomass, you got to plant them earlier and earlier. But what we can find is we can plant the grasses 4 weeks, give or take, ahead of, kind of the onset of cold temperatures that are going to stay, and they'll germinate and they'll get some growth out. Whereas if you do that with a brassica or a legume, you're probably not going to get much growth at all. Maybe not even get them to germinate. The right time and weather comes into play as well. And I say weather because really what we're talking about, as far as the right time to seed, comes back into how much temperature do you have. We have some years where we start getting cold temperatures as early as, early October. We have other years where we'll stay warm clear through all of November. And so that time that you have for them to grow in the fall is going to dictate that fall growth. And especially when we're maybe looking at not enough fall growth, that's when we might have some impact on the amount of spring growth. And then the right seeding method. So aerial, broadcast, or drilled. Obviously, choosing that is going to be a matter of fact of what we're using out there for our main crop management practices. So if we're using a long maturity corn and a long maturity soybeans, we may only have the option of broadcasting or aerial seeding. If we're taking off a silage crop, we have, or even an earlier maturity soybean, we may have the option of being able to go out and drill seed those. And so getting those seeded and that seeding method is really going to guide some things. Seeding method is also going to dictate, what species we're able to use. Very few people want to even recommend using an aerial or a broadcast with legumes. Part of that is just keeping the legume seed, distributed in a mix well, but also getting good seed to soil contact, getting good distribution of that seed. Whereas if you get to some of the larger seeded brassicas like turnips or even radishes, they seed a lot better aerially than the legumes would. But overall, it's going to be those grasses that are going to be our surefire way to get good success with a cover crop and getting good biomass with that aerial or broadcast seeding. And then weather, again, is an impact here because, quite honestly, we can go out and we can aerial and broadcast seed in early September, maybe even late August in Iowa. And if it's dry or we have no rainfall, they're just going to sit there. And so that's not going to get us a whole lot of biomass. But if we have a lot of rainfall, aerial seeding is going to, and broadcast seeding, they're going to give us more biomass than if we wait and drill seed after the corn and soybeans are harvested. So again, the weather around that, the seeding time, the seeding method is also going to dictate kind of where we're at as far as how much biomass we're going to get, both in the fall and in the spring. Okay, so again, just coming back to, what's your goal? We know with most of these goals that, again, the more biomass that we produce, the more benefit we're going to get. And so kind of knowing where those critical points are, like I mentioned, right? So with soil health or nutrient sediment loss reduction, we may only need 2,000 or 3,000 pounds of biomass to really get us to that critical point where we get the benefits, but we're not necessarily having the negative side on the crop production. Whereas with forage potential, whether it's grazing, whether it's taking it for like a haylage, now we're probably thinking that we probably need, 4,000, maybe even up to 6,000 pounds of biomass out there. And then weed suppression, again, it's just going to depend on, are you looking at a winter annual? Are you looking at kind of the early spring flushes? Or are you looking at something like water hemp here where you have cohorts that are emerging, throughout the early mid summer even. And so, again, just realizing that the amount of biomass is going to dictate, how successful you are at reaching, your goals there. A couple keys to success here is really go into adoption of cover crops with a really good mindset. Go in with the mindset that you want to make this work. Because if it's you're just doing it for the cost share, or if you're doing it because of other pressures, you may not give it a full faith effort, and that will not necessarily lead to the success that you're going to want. The second part of that is the systems change aspect. Realize that it's going to require that you change your tillage system, you change your nitrogen program. You may even need to change your herbicide program to get those cover crops established and or terminated. So remember that you're really going to be changing your entire system and not just kind of a plug and play practice here. We've already talked about the keys to why we want to get good establishment, right? Good establishment is going to give us the biomass that we need and or want. Termination, again, we use a lot of rules of thumbs to terminate right now, whether it's crop height or whether it's days before planting or after planting, right? But if we're really focused on the goals, we maybe need to think about how much biomass do we need to get there, and then what does that do to how we terminate, when we terminate, things like that. So I think that's a real key to focus in on. A couple of resources here as I close out. The first thing I'll note is that the Midwest Cover Crops Council, their website has moved, and so if you're a user of them, go to midwestcovercrops.org. Bookmark their website, and you'll be able to find it pretty easily. It should also be redirecting, but just in case there's a bug in that, know that it has moved. They have some very nice decision tools. They have a field guide. It's a pocket field guide that you can carry around with you very easily. So a nice resource there. And then a couple publications for people that are beginners into adopting of cover crops. In cooperation with the Midwest Cover Crops Council, there's a couple cover crop recipes. I'm showing, corn going to soybeans or soybeans going to corn, but they also have a couple developed for silage production. And so take a look at those. Those are available both on the Iowa State Extension store, but then also on the Midwest Cover Crops Council page. And then another nice resource is the Whole Farm Conservation Best Practices Manual. In this manual here, again, it has more than just cover crops. It has infield and edge of field practices. It has some nice decision trees to help guide you through that adoption process. So with that, thank you, and I hope this finds you well.